A very warm welcome to Talking Business During Crisis, a series of informative and stimulating conversations where we take the opportunity to look at how organizations globally are responding during this period of upheaval and how leaders are navigating the challenges that they face. My name is Caron Beaton-Wells. I'm the Deputy Dean of the Melbourne Business School, and it's my great pleasure to host this webinar, which will take us through to 2 o'clock over your lunchtime. Thank you again for joining us. I'm going to just do some housekeeping to begin with. Shortly, I'll introduce you to our guest, Sri Shivananda, and Professor Hugh Williams, who will steward the conversation on behalf of the school. Hugh and Sri will spend about 40 minutes discussing a range of topics, and then you'll be invited to ask questions of your own. If while you're listening you have a question for Sri, please submit this using the Q&A function rather than the raise your hand button. If you see a question submitted by someone else that you'd also like answered, you can upvote it in a very democratic way by pressing the thumbs up button. I'll be monitoring your questions as we go, and when we get towards the end, I'll make sure that we have time to address as many as possible. And at the conclusion, you will be redirected to a short survey. We would very much appreciate your feedback so that we can continue to develop and improve this program. So without further ado, today we have the great privilege of speaking with Sri Shivananda, who joins us from California. So it's certainly evening time for him. Welcome, Sri. Sri plays a critical role in helping PayPal remain at the forefront of innovation as its Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer. He oversees technology platforms and experiences and leads a really talented team that's responsible for the company's secure, reliable, and scalable global infrastructure and its strategic core platform. That is the foundation that enables PayPal to deliver its innovative products and services to consumers and merchants all around the world. Joining Sri is Hugh Williams, who may well now be known to many of you. Hugh is the inaugural Melbourne Business School Enterprise Professor, and I'm sure, no doubt, you've come across him if you've had anything to do with the school's Centre for Business Analytics. Hugh himself is an advisor, investor, and former tech executive. He's the venture partner at a Melbourne VC firm, Rampersand, and an advisor at several companies, including DoorDash, Moonpig, and Ocado. Don't you love those names? Hugh is also the co-founder of CS in Schools, a philanthropic program that helps teachers to teach coding. So we'll stop the slides there. I'm really delighted to be in the company of Sri, Hugh, and all of yourselves today. Welcome again, Sri. We look forward to listening to the conversation as it unfolds. Hugh, over to you.
Thanks, Caron. It's a pleasure to be here today, and pleasure to get the opportunity to chat with my very good friend and former colleague, Sri Shivananda. So we were lucky enough to work together, I think, for 5 or 6 years in the late 2000s into the early 2010s. So it's a really fantastic opportunity to get to see Sri again and have a conversation about his time at PayPal. So welcome, Sri. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Hugh.
So I thought I might start by just polling our audience. So we've got a poll feature that we might just bring up on the screen, and we'll use that as a way to guide the conversation today, Sri. So we'll ask the audience what they'd most like to hear about, whether it's leadership in the COVID-19 era, which I'm sure has been challenging and a fantastic learning experience for you. I'd love to talk about that. Your career journey and leadership advice, Silicon Valley culture and companies, or perhaps the future of commerce and digital payments, which looks like it's the winning vote at the moment. We'll probably talk about one of these topics, Sri, for a while, and then come back, bring this poll up again, and be guided about a second topic. So the topic that came second will probably also get an opportunity to chat about. So it looks like the audience would love us to chat in a moment about the future of commerce and digital payments. But I thought I might just start by making the statement that, you know, you are a senior vice president and the CTO of PayPal today. What does CTO mean at PayPal? I know it can mean different things at different organizations. And what parts of PayPal are you responsible for?
Yeah, so CTO, as you know, has various different flavors. In fact, just today, there was somebody who is an ex-colleague who reached out for advice to say, hey, I'm trying to hire a CTO. And I said, what flavor? So at PayPal, it's many different things. I have three main responsibilities. My day job is to manage all of the infrastructure and foundational platforms that includes information security, infrastructure, information technology, data platforms, and engineering platforms. But then I have a horizontal role across the company to ensure that we have a cohesive technology strategy as a company, that not every unit is trying to move in their own direction, that the choices that we are making, whether it's in terms of modernizing or scaling and so on, are choices that we are making collectively, thoughtfully, aligned, and moving in that direction. The third one is in terms of helping the platform business, which is, if you take the brain of PayPal, which is the payments operating system that we want to be for the whole world, it includes identity, payments, risk, compliance, and credit. And those five platforms together form what's the brain of PayPal. And to do it in a way that actually is leveraged internally within the company, but can also be used by anyone who wants to program against our utility outside the company, is the third part of what I do. So three pieces: one, which includes an organization I run, and two, as responsibilities that I have to both shape and influence the company.
Awesome. And then how does building the actual experiences that customers see happen at PayPal? So who builds the app that we're all using, and the website pixels that we're all very familiar with?
I think the best way to think of technology at PayPal is in 4 layers. And I'll draw an analogy, though many of you are probably very technical, that the bottommost layer of technology is all things that are physical. You can think of about that as the skeletal infrastructure, right, of the body, right? The second thing up from there is various different horizontal services, which could actually apply to any company. It's not just PayPal. It could apply to an insurance company or some other company. And these are things like monitoring and messaging and cryptography and so on, which are nothing to do with payments. And then comes that brain that I talked about, which is a set of engineers. And finally, the heart of PayPal, which is both the web experience and the mobile experience and the APIs. And those are teams that we have, one focused on consumer experiences, which we have more than 300 million of, and the other focused on merchant experiences, which we have more than 20 million of. And collectively, that two-sided ecosystem is what PayPal is all about. But we have 2 independent teams focusing one on the consumer, one on the merchant, of course, with an overlap where they have to collaborate and make sure that it's all cohesive end-to-end.
Thanks. So moving on to the topic of the future of commerce and digital payments, I watched a speech that you gave recently at the ET Global Business Summit. I thought it was a terrific presentation, and I'd recommend to anybody out there who's interested to take a look. And it seemed the theme of your presentation was that revolutions in technology are about removing steps and the technologies themselves, so simplifying the experience. I know you spoke about horses and carriages ultimately just becoming carriages, corded phones becoming cordless phones, so losing the cord, and then GPSs, cameras, phones becoming our more ubiquitous smartphone. So your thesis is that PayPal really, I guess, is simplifying commerce by removing cards from commerce. So most of us use cardless payments in our lives, but we all have plenty of cards in our wallets too. Do you see a world where cards will actually no longer be used?
Absolutely. At some point in time, we're already seeing the removal of cash from the ecosystem. And in fact, in the situation we are in right now, currency and coins happen to be one of those things that extend touch. So it'll probably reduce in terms of usage, because there's a possibility you may get infected by just using currency. In terms of cards, cards have had a life, but not as long as currency has had. Currency has been around now for hundreds of years. Cards have been only around since 1950s. But I do see a point in time where cards are no longer required. Even card actually extends touch like currency does in a COVID-19 world. First of all, I mean, the convergence of so many different services into the mobile phone will probably become a mode of payment delivery. But we are also thinking in terms of the concept of ambient payments. Payments that happen, there used to be this situation where in your shopping activity, even today, the last thing you do is this explicit act of paying. And that is slowly changing. If many of you have taken a ride share, for example, here in the United States and in many places in the world, you have Uber that you use to take a taxi ride. If I were to ask you the question, when do you pay? I think you'll think for a little bit and you'll go, maybe I don't, or maybe I did when I started the ride. Actually, you don't. When you express the intent for the ride, everything was taken care of. When you finish the ride, the payment happened, and all of that happened with your intent, but not necessarily needing action on your behalf. And we see more and more of that happening, whether it is subscriptions, payments through apps like Uber and so on, or for that matter, over time, with the growth of devices around you, also called Internet of Things, commerce will become contextual, and commerce will come to every device you're in, including whether it may be a voice device or a car and such. And so it'll go into hiding. It'll become seamless. It will be secure. It'll be convenient. And payment will be not the main thing that you think of. You think of what you want to do, the payment happens automatically.
And do you think that'll extend as this idea of ambient payments? I mean, do you think that'll extend as far as buying groceries in the grocery store, or goods in the supermarket, as we probably say here in Australia, or other sort of services on the high street in shops? Do you see it extending that far? I mean, I know Amazon's been experimenting with it, but will it go that far?
There are many experiments going on. Amazon Go is one of the most popular experiments that's happening there, where the tracking of what you're picking up and putting in your shopping basket is happening through a lot of sensors and cameras and so on. So when you walk out of the store, one, the store knows who you are, store knows what you already picked up. Why put the friction of payment? The payment can actually happen in the background, right? Whether that will happen tomorrow or next week or next month, of course not. I mean, I think we will still all continue to use many of the technologies we use today, some lesser than the others. But over time, more and more of payments will actually become ambient, including what you do in supermarkets and grocery stores.
And what does that mean for PayPal itself, or more explicitly, I guess, what does that mean for you and your organization building that I think third layer in your cake, if you like?
Yeah. So the way to think of it is platform mindset means more today than it has ever meant. Experiences come and go. Experiences have a shelf life of about 18 months or so. But when you build platforms live for decades. So if you're in any business today, and if you want to survive digitization and thrive in the world of digitization, it is best to think of not just building your technology in the form of a platform, but to think of the platform business model itself and what that means. And this is not new to us. I think we recognized this a long time ago. If we look at PayPal, PayPal actually started off as a company that was not even thinking payments in the beginning. They were thinking cryptography. And then it became about beaming payments over Palm Pilots in the late 90s. Soon, we realized that there was no market for that. Then we made it about payments over email. And then payments over email was not fetching any money. Therefore, we went on eBay to help sellers in terms of accepting money from all over the world. And so if you look at this, there is a lot of transitions that happen. And we soon realized, wait, if we can do that for eBay, can we do it for millions of other merchants? And the only approach to that was to go from being purely experience-centric to being a platform.
And you know, my experience in building platforms has always been that you figure out a lot about what the platform is as you build it, but then every number of years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever it is, you actually have to fundamentally rewrite the platform because where you began is not where you get to 5 or 6 years later. Is that how you think? Is that how PayPal thinks about platforms? Do you think, are they things that evolve and get rewritten over time?
Yeah, I think there are two aspects to that. The substance of the platform itself, if you design it properly, can actually last a long period of time. When I think about platforms, I think in terms of creating a design based on nouns and verbs. You take the things that you're going to operate on, like, for example, payment is a noun, or a user is a noun. Pay is a verb. And so if you take those fundamentals and build a basic model based on those fundamentals, you can use today's technologies to build the platform. But what you'll soon realize is, one, you're globalizing, you're scaling. You're going from hundreds to thousands to millions to tens of millions to hundreds of millions to billions of payments. And as that happens, the technology that you built the platform with 5 years ago is no longer relevant, cannot scale, and you have to create a new technology life cycle. So you have to re-platform and rewrite, but as you do that, you can take some new considerations into mind. There may be new regulations to pay attention to. There may be new step functions and scale that you want to reach and such. So a semi-frequent rewrite of a platform is always a good idea to make sure that you're on a trajectory that can last a long period of time, but nothing that you write lives forever. Today's mainframes that people sometimes look at with disgust sometimes were amazing things 40 years ago, right? So frequent rewrite is definitely a good idea. In platforms, it's less than experiences, but even platforms require rewrites.
So picking up on that theme of verbs and nouns, I've watched a few other of your recent interviews, and it seems, at least pre-COVID, that you've personally often been on the road in Asia. So I'll take that as an indication of how important global expansion is to PayPal's business. So thinking of nouns, I mean, can you give us a few examples of what makes payments hard for a company like PayPal in, say, Indonesia, India, or sub-Saharan Africa? And they also must have some significant effect on the platform that you build.
Yeah, so in any kind of a marketplace business, you're dealing with a two-sided network. And two-sided networks are harder to partition than services that are basically a single user service. And I think scaling it globally comes with a lot of other very interesting challenges. One is you have to be relevant locally based on the methods that are available in each market. Now, most of us tend to think that the digitization of payments is somewhat standardized around the world. It's not. The way money moves across the world may have some standards, but in each country you have different kinds of payment types, different ways that people actually engage in payments. There are places where cash on delivery is actually the only mode people will engage in. Like in India, cash on delivery is big. Installments are big in certain markets. Paying right away with cash is some markets. Germany, for example, is a big ACH country. They only operate on banks. US, on the other hand, is a credit card market, right? And layered on top of all of this is, given a certain global collapses in the financial systems, every country in the world, you should think of it as a jurisdiction that has laws on money. And that comes up in the form of regulations. And the systems that you build have to be compliant in every jurisdiction you're operating in. So what that does is, while the platform gives you the economies of scale, you have to figure out how to deal with the variability of each market and still be able to cater to that in spite of building a standardized platform.
And what about things like feature phones and less reliable mobile networks and perhaps less internet infrastructure, those kinds of things? How do they affect PayPal's businesses in some of those geographies?
It plays a big role. In markets where connectivity is better, the adoption and the engagement is higher. In markets where the connectivity is not great, you have to make special provisions that your app is lighter, your experience is faster, you're trying to put as many things as close to the customer as possible, and so on. And Hugh, you know from the work that we did together at one point in time, the latency of the experience matters a lot. Even 10 milliseconds extra changes the revenue curve for the company in a big way. So providing an experience that, of course, they can trust and find convenient, but is fast, becomes very, very critical.
And is that still true, that really speed is a gift that just keeps on giving? Do you still find that even in the developed world?
Absolutely. I think there is a certain threshold that we have figured out. Like if an experience is 2 seconds or faster, at that point in time, your return on investment to further reduce it actually drops by a bunch. But if your experience takes any longer than 2 seconds, whether it's on a mobile device or on web, or for that matter, even at the counter in a store, then it starts to create all kinds of issues, drop in engagement, and sometimes people don't even return back to your product or service.
And maybe just taking us back to sort of the start of this part of the conversation about commerce and digital payments. Why do you think we are so loyal to cards and banks? I mean, I use digital payments in my life as much as possible, but I've still got 3 credit cards in the front of my very small wallet, and I wouldn't go anywhere without it. Why do you think that's the case? And how do you think we change that?
So there are many different ways to think of it, right? One is habituation itself. Then there is also, in some cases, a generational barrier. There is barriers of trust, and so many different things. People who are comfortable using cash all the time know that it is reliable. They can use it anywhere. And that they don't have any concerns on their privacy as they're doing that. If you look at cards have now been habituated over more than like 7 decades. And given that habituation, people have gotten used to the fact that, yes, it offers a certain level of convenience. In fact, if you remember when the chip and pin first started, it was a little bit more of a habituation from a stripe. Swiping a card was easy. But when you went to chip and pin, it caused a bit of friction. Like people hesitated a bit. When the phones came around, and I remember actually making a trip to Sydney, which I think was in, I'm forgetting whether it was 16 or something. And I was surprised at the number of locations that actually took a phone payment. And the number of times the shopkeeper would tell me, like, wait, what did you do? Like, really, you paid me? How is that possible, right? So sometimes the technology actually moves ahead and habituation trails, behavioral changes trail. And there are certain triggers that cause that behavioral changes to occur. Some triggers could just purely be generational. More digitized generations will actually use more digital payments. I'll just take a few seconds to tell you the history of ATMs in the US. Citibank actually put an ATM infrastructure for a long period of time, and they were not seeing much of a usage. And there was one blizzard in the early 80s or something of that nature, and that increased the use of ATMs and then kicked in a change that stayed forever. And we are seeing that now with COVID-19. What we are seeing now is the digital payments are increasing by a big margin. And if you believe the rule of habituation being 21 days, we are well into the 21-day time frame. Some of this habituation will stick. Some of it will probably be elastic, and you'll head back to previous uses.
Yeah. I hope we'll get a chance in a moment to chat a little bit more about COVID-19 and its impact on you as a leader and the business. But maybe just to wrap up our conversation on sort of commerce and digital payments. I mean, it wouldn't be a conversation about commerce and digital payments if I didn't bring up Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So do you see them becoming mainstream, and how do you think about that in the context of PayPal?
So digitization of currency is definitely a matter of when. It's not an if. It's happening. And that digitization can take many different forms. Like consumer digitization is probably leading the game. Because look, we don't see the currency, we don't see the physical form. We are using it day to day, and that's happening. Now, the underlying currency itself will also get digitized. And there are many different reasons for which the governments want this, the regulators want this. Actually, citizens want this as well. Will it be in the form of something like Bitcoin? Probably not, but it will leverage the same underlying technologies in many ways, but with probably larger scale. What's happened with Bitcoin and certain other cryptocurrencies is they've actually become a little bit more about a value like gold than currency. It's more an asset than a currency, right? And the volatility of those methods or currencies make it unviable for retail. And as you know, retailers operate on a very thin margin. They can deal with the volatility that brings. But digitization is upon us. We're already into maybe second and third generation of digital currencies. Stable coins, which are backed by national currencies, give more trust, give that lack of volatility, give the stability, and will actually make settlements and the availability of funds faster for merchants. So this is definitely happening. Digitization of currencies is upon us. It'll take a little bit, but it's bound to happen.
I saw you on Bloomberg talking about blockchain and its use in technology. So while we're on this theme, I mean, how do you think blockchain technologies might be actually used in the future of payments if it's not necessarily just to power these volatile cryptocurrencies?
So I think the same kind of leverage that we see with Bitcoin and blockchain will actually apply to digital currencies as well, as just a immutable ledger that's available, solving the double spend problem, and so on. But the use of blockchain itself will go well beyond payments in my mind. I think there is a lot of aspects related to custody that it can apply in. There's a lot of aspects related to supply chain that it can apply in, and so on. Authenticity, identity, and various other things where blockchain has the potential to apply. Today, unfortunately, most of the current iterations are not actually high transaction throughput yet, but that will happen. We are already beginning to see the third generation of blockchain technologies, ones that can do more than 1,000 transactions a second and so on. And it won't be long. In the next 5 years, we'll probably see blockchain technologies that can actually scale to tens of thousands of payments and transactions a second and such. So I think while on the one hand, it's a technology that is a solution that's looking for a second problem, I believe that it is going to find it, and it will be a part of future technology roadmaps.
It's nice to see some optimism. I've been quite pessimistic about blockchain, but I like your optimism. This might be a good point, Sri, if it's okay with you, to maybe pop the poll back up and get folks to vote again on the next topic they'd like us to talk about. And I'd also encourage folks, if you look down in the ribbon at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A function. You can click on that. You can type in questions, and we'd love you also to just vote up questions that you'd like to see answered. So I'll stop talking to Sri in maybe 10 or 12 minutes, and I'll hand back to Karan, who'll bring some of your questions to the front. So please pop in there and ask questions and vote. It looks to me, Sri, like it's career journey and leadership advice, pipping leadership in the COVID-19 era, but I may sneak a question in from the COVID-19 era as well. So perhaps just talking a little bit about something that we share in common. So I'm spending much of my time these days helping to make sure that that Australian students get the chance to learn how to code in school. How important for you has been being able to code, and how did you learn to code back in the day?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, particularly for me. I don't know if many people know, but I have both a bachelor's and a master's in mechanical engineering. I'm not a computer science grad, but here's what happened. I always say that I find myself here by accident because as a teenager, I wanted to be a pilot in the Indian Air Force. And I actually tried 3 times. And after the 3rd time, it was my father who told me, look, you tried 3 times. this may not be working. It's probably time to move on. And by that time, most people that went to high school with me had finished 1 year of college. So 1 year later, and it was him who suggested, like, you should probably go write the engineering test because you're a tinkerer. I've seen you do things well with things around home. So that's when I took the engineering test, and I got into a college, and the best I could muster up is mechanical engineering. That said, I made a rather interesting choice at the end of my first year of engineering. My dad gave me an option. He said, like, I have this much money, and you can do one of 2 things. You can either buy a motorcycle like all your buddies are, or at my workplace, they're handing out this thing called a PC. And if you want one of those, we can get those. And I chose the PC. I picked the PC. And it was literally an 8088 with 640 kilobytes of RAM and a 320 kilobyte floppy drive. Not a hard drive, but a floppy drive. And in many cases, you'd have to put the OS disk in, boot it up, pull it out, put the programming disk in, program. And if you did something with memory pointers, it would all come crashing and you'd start it all over again. That is how I learned programming, starting with some assembly, some Visual Basic, going to Pascal, doing a little bit of Fortran, getting to C and getting hooked on C is how I started programming. And that was the start. It was the close to the end of the first year of engineering is how I got into computing. And I have to say, I fell in love with it, deeply in love with it.
Why is that, Sri? Why do you love it so much?
I found all of a sudden the ability to leverage constructs of language to instruct a machine to do something you wanted. So far, a machine meant something static to me. Like, it's not like, I mean, I was dealing with a radio, maybe a television, or maybe something else. And those things were non-programmable, if you will. I mean, they had a purpose, they were built, and you could use them. But here is a powerful machine which I could instruct. I mean, I was playing around with graphics. Though I had a VGA monitor, I was building games, all kinds of different things. In fact, I remember helping a buddy on his bachelor's project with character recognition in 1991. So it was just, it was a creative release. It was a sense of satisfaction at 4:30 in the morning when you finally cracked that thing and it worked. Or for that matter, one of those times where the first time you typed up your thoughts, it actually all worked. All of those things just made it something personal. And that's probably why I fell in love with it.
Yeah, awesome. And I noticed you've got a nice looking Macintosh SE in the background there. So there's still clearly some nostalgia for the old days, Sri.
Yeah.
So just moving forward a little bit in your career, I know near the beginning of your career, you joined eBay through the acquisition of Deja News in 2000. Tell us a bit about the experience of being acquired by eBay and what was it like to join an internet titan like eBay during the dotcom bubble?
Well, I'll speak a little bit, if you don't mind, about Deja News, which was a company where at the peak was about 300 people strong. We did two things. We did online news groups, and we did ratings and reviews and catalogs. And early 2000s were not a great time. In fact, we saw the downturn at that time, and the company had burnt all the money in marketing. And we went from 300 to 200 to like 150 to 70, down to 12 people, 2 weeks away from bankruptcy. And we find two buyers. So we split the company in two parts, and we sold one half of it to Google. Groups.google.com is actually software we wrote at Deja News, online news groups. And then the other part was bought by a company called half.com, which was an eBay company. So the inside joke was half the company was bought by half.com. And that's how I came in. And when I made the transition, you had to keep in mind, late 90s, early 2000s, everyone had sold me on the fact that if I became a database administrator, I would retire in 2 years. And so I went from being a software programmer to a database administrator, even got my certification. And then I realized 2000 comes and goes, and I'm not retiring. So I went back to software engineering. Coming to eBay was an experience. I mean, it was a big deal at that time. We were still in Austin, Texas. They were a big company in San Jose. And at some point in time, we shut down the Austin office. We all moved to San Jose, and it was the darling of the internet. And I'll tell you one particular experience where we were hiring, and nobody else was in the early 2000s. And the line that formed for people who wanted to submit their resumes and have a phone screen actually went all the way up to the highway. And I'm telling you, it's a 1.5 mile distance. That's the line we had. That's how much eBay was a darling at that time, right? So, but wild ride, amazing scaling journey. And then eBay went through its own turnaround, various generations of leaders who taught me various different things in the process. I thoroughly enjoyed and learned from every single day of my experience at eBay, and I value that a lot.
So I know you spent about 15 years at eBay, and you've been at PayPal for over 4 now. And you've also, along that journey, gone from being an individual contributor who was looking after databases to an individual contributor software engineer to today managing thousands of people. So tell me a little bit about that. I mean, what do you fundamentally do differently today as a leader than you did, say, 10 years ago or 15 years ago in that journey?
I think every step in this journey probably brings me to where I am today. Every step in the journey was a realization that the things that got me to succeed with all the things that I did in the past are not all going to be sufficient to continue to succeed where I need to go. There were a lot of things that were important. I think a critical part of this was like being structured about ambition and aspiration, and thinking of your career as a campaign that you're running, and the fact that it is something that you don't take lightly. You think about where you want to go, and I believe in micro ambitions. So it was always, what is that next step? It's not like that destination that I wanted to go, but what was the next step? I was always very fortunate to have amazing mentors and coaches, and some of them believed in me more than I did in myself. And they gave me the confidence to chase things that other people were running from. And those risks started to pay off. And as those risks paid off, for somebody who used to be very underconfident, I started to gain confidence to take on even more risks. So it's even though I was there for 15 years at eBay, it was 7 different roles that I had at the company. And each one of those roles taught me many different things. And by the way, it was not all one climb in one direction. There were various times where I took a smaller role to get going again. And every one of those experiences grew me as a professional, but grew me as a person as well. And I would say the most critical thing in running large organization is you have to discover yourself as a person and grow as an individual and build yourself to be able to lead other people where you need to take them.
So, like this idea of sort of micro choices or micro steps. I mean, did you know, I know you've been an architect, you've looked after product management teams, you know, you've been an individual contributor software engineer, you've run engineering teams. Were each of those sort of conscious decisions? Were they sort of very deliberate micro steps, or was it deliberate that you got this set of broad experiences, or was it more just circumstance and luck along the way?
I think it's a combination of both, Hugh. There were certain times where it was a deliberate choice I made. There were times where it was a chance occurrence that landed in my lap. And there were times where I was literally forced into it against my own beliefs and against my own confidence in some cases where, like I said, there were people who believed in certain capabilities I had more than I did, and I couldn't see it. And they go like, look, what's the risk? Go ahead, take it, right? I don't know if you remember this, but like when you and I worked together, one such experience was I was running a decently sized global organization, probably about 250 people. And we were going to go on this moonshot journey on a technology transformation within the company. And you and Mark recruited me for that. And while I hesitated for a bit, I knew that if that opportunity were to take off, it would be grand, not just for the outcome, but also for me growing internally as a person. So it's a mix of all kinds of things. There is some luck involved, some chance involved, some deliberate moves involved, investment in yourself and other people, and investment by others in you. All need to happen.
Last question from me, and then I'd love to throw it back to Karan to ask you a couple of questions. But is there a period that you look back on and say that was the golden era, the time where I learned the most, achieved the most? Is there a particular part you're nostalgic about?
So in retrospect, there are a lot of people who ask me the question, hey, what would you change about your career? And when I reflect back on that, I say nothing. Whether it was the good parts or the not so good parts. For example, when I moved from Austin to San Jose, I took a role that was one level lower. And when I dissect back my career journey, I think that was the trigger for ambition. There was something about that situation that caused me to say, okay, I think I have to prove something to myself, not to others, but to myself. So that was a beginning of a trigger for an ambition. But what I'll tell you is the toughest of initiatives, the toughest of circumstances, and the toughest of crises have been the ones that have generated the most learning, the most satisfaction, and actually the most pride in the career I've had.
Yeah, fabulous. So Sri, I could ask you questions all day and learn from your experience, but I'd love the opportunity to hand back to Karan and engage the audience a little bit in asking you a few questions. So I might hand back to her and give her the reins, and look forward to hearing a little bit more. But thank you.
Thank you, Hugh.
Thank you, Hugh, and thank you, Sri. That was super stimulating. I'm burning with questions of my own, but I'm going to give others an opportunity, and I'm very grateful for the upvoting system that we have some clear winners in terms of what people want to hear. My micro ambition is to get through as many of these questions as I can in the time available. So the first question, or the clearest winner in terms of number of votes, it's a question about identity and security, which I know is a matter close to PayPal's heart, its mission being to very much enhance the trust that's fundamental to financial inclusiveness and empowerment. The question is, how will identity verification and biometrics evolve in the context of payments? And what does PayPal's identity roadmap look like?
So I'll just start with the context that when we think about the technology roadmap, security is the #1 priority. In fact, some of the highest investment we make is in security. And the reason we do that is because we believe that we are actually more in the business of trust than in the business of payments. And that trust is only possible if people who interact with us and use our services feel secure and safe. And that security and safety comes in multiple forms. On the one hand, in terms of cybersecurity, but on the other hand, in terms of fraud and risk and various other practices. In terms of identity itself, there is no doubt that on the one hand, it is important for identity, as in the way to establish the claim that an individual is the individual in a seamless and convenient way. But at the same time, to not do it wrong, as in like not identify the wrong person or not identify the person as the wrong person. In our identity roadmap, we are taking all of the trends that are available in the industry right now. And in fact, we have pioneered various methods in identity. We are a big part of the FIDO Alliance ourselves, and a lot of the multi-factor authentication on the internet has emerged from the FIDO Alliance. And we now take a lot of research and development that we do in terms of implicit multi-factor. Like there are various things about how an individual uses their device, or biometrics is one critical way. Like, and as you know, a fingerprint is way more potent than a password. 5 of those fingerprints is much more. Iris is a big thing. Facial recognition is a big thing. So leveraging these things on the form factors that they're available on, but doing so in a way that we don't necessarily take any of those biometrics and store it back at PayPal. We do it based on the secure element in the devices itself and such. So using the most modern methods, using methods that are convenient, identifying people securely and correctly, and avoiding this concept of an account takeover of anyone reusing or leveraging your credentials to do harm to you or conduct a transaction. All of those are aspects. We have a fairly large identity team. We have a very big cybersecurity team. And we, on top of everything that you see in the industry, we also look at various different network factors to identify an individual, both contextually in the transaction and also through their reputation that we compute on the back end.
Wow. Well, certainly it's evident from what you say, but more generally that it's tech leading the way with these measures rather than government necessarily. In fact, regulators, as we know, often have more of an analog view of the world, and some catching up to do. I have to tell you, there's been a bit of a hot competition going on between the second and third questions for popularity, but at the moment this is winning out. And actually they have a common theme, which is a theme of competition, one dear to my heart. The first one is about buy now, pay later platforms like Afterpay and ZipPay being players that are fast expanding their presence in the market. What role do you see for PayPal, if any, in that space?
So our mission, as we see it, is to help people manage and move money, not just those that are privileged in using the digital systems today, but also the underserved markets around the world. And when we look at us being a customer champion company, one of the things that we have strongly believed in is giving customers the choice. And about 2 years ago, we rolled out a very large change where we went from having people just use their balance to make payments to be able to use any instrument they want in the wallet. And similar to that, we actually have credit products as well. There are lending products we have both for the merchants and for the consumers as well. The model of buy now, pay later is something that is an important service to offer to customers. And companies like Afterpay, Affirm, ZipPay, Klarna, and so on have made some great progress in here. And we believe that that's an aspect on our roadmaps as well. And given the ubiquity and the surface area of coverage that we have in terms of checkout around the world, it's only a matter of time that this will also be a feature on PayPal checkout. That said, it's available today in the form of PayPal credit. But I think the innovation that we've seen in experiences in offering that credit in certain ways is what we learn from as well. And at some point in time, that'll be on the roadmap for delivery too.
So watch that space from PayPal. This is also, in a sense, a competition question, Sri. It's about comparing the situation in China with Western countries. And the question refers to the fact that, of course, in China, they've been cardless for many, many years. And that there's been one payment system that has tended to dominate. I'm assuming that's a reference to Alipay, but of course, there's WeChat, Tencent's WeChat as well. And my understanding is that between the two of them, they enjoy about 90% share of the now $17 trillion mobile payments market. So the question is, how do you see this playing out in Western countries if Western countries are to become cardless or follow a similar trend? And you did make the point, I think quite rightly, every jurisdiction is different in these trends. But do you think that this is a space likely to be dominated by one or two mobile payment methods, or is the market going to be more dispersed outside of China?
Yeah, so if you look at it, I think the competition that exists in the market still, particularly in terms of how much available space is there to capture, the competition is still actually against cash. In most parts of the world, cash transactions still dominate more than 75% of all transactions. So in terms of number of players, I expect that there'll be a lot of different players who will go after this. Some that are specific to those geographies, some that are global as well. And the ones that are probably going to be more global are the ones that have figured out what globalization means. It is not just a matter of storing value or moving money or supporting a checkout. It is about understanding those markets, creating catered solutions on top of a global platform. And then on top of that, ensuring that you are also building the regulatory aspects in a way that is scalable. What has happened with commerce in terms of trends, if you see, is the world has become one unlimited shelf of goods. There is no longer anything that you cannot reach if you can afford it. And that globalization brings with it a need for a wallet that can work globally as well. So while there will be a lot of local players, there'll be a few global players. One is, I think, always bad for the market. Do we want to be big? Absolutely, yes. Do we want to be the only one? Probably that's too much to expect, right? So I would say many players locally, a few players globally, and those that will play globally will have to understand the globe better and make sure that while they build a powerful global platform, they build relevant local experiences with all the right checks and balances.
That's a great insight, Sri. Probably last one. This is about investments in R&D. We know big tech are the largest investors in this regard. So the question is for you, does PayPal have a dedicated department for future developments and research? And if so, what proportion of investment goes into financing that type of activity?
So I'll talk about a model that's fairly popular. Most of you have probably heard of Horizon 1 innovation, Horizon 2 innovation, and Horizon 3 innovation. Horizon 1 innovation is where most of the day-to-day innovation actually occurs. It's within the mass of the organization where people are figuring out new means of doing things every single day. And those are investments that happen in line, and therefore you don't necessarily separate it out. Horizon 2 is what you're pursuing over a 2-year time frame. And Horizon 3 is the 3-year and beyond kind of time frame. We have a group that is dedicated to Horizon 3. We have some groups that do Horizon 2, and we have a large number of groups, hundreds actually, that do Horizon 1. The Horizon 3 investment is done through various different means. We have a blockchain research group. We have a few people looking into quantum computing technologies and various such things, which we know are a trend to watch, leverage, play around with, experiment, but are not necessarily today's technologies per se. We also have innovation labs around the world, one in Singapore, one in Chennai, India, and one in San Jose, where we allow free-form innovation to occur through conversations and people to get together and start new projects as well. And last but not the least, we also have a venture fund, and we invest in small companies that are pursuing certain kinds of ideas as a venture capitalist as well.
Thank you, Sri. Well, we could talk all day. There are so many questions I didn't get to, and I know many others people have on the edge of their lips just listening to you. It would be wonderful if we could continue forever, but we have reached 2 o'clock, and I'm committed to allowing you to get on with your evening, but also all of our participants to get on with whatever's on their agenda for the day. So, Sri, thank you again for joining us here in the Melbourne Business School's community, our students, our alumni, friends and colleagues. It's been an absolute privilege. Hugh, thank you again for so ably leading this conversation and for introducing Sri to us. I might rely on you to use your powers of persuasion to draw him back and perhaps even to give us a demo of his 3D printer that he's got there in his background. To all of you who I can't see, but I know you're here and you've stayed with us, so many of you, thank you again for joining us. If you have enjoyed the session or would like to suggest topics for future webinars, we'd really welcome your feedback, so please do hang around just to fill out our brief survey. I'm also delighted to invite you to an ongoing series of webinars, both in Talking Business During Crisis, but also in the Talking Data series from the Centre of Business Analytics. You can see more information on all of those events, and the registration links are available, of course, on the Melbourne Business School website at events. And with that, thank you again to all of you. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, Sri. Thank you, Hugh. And I'll draw matters to a close there.
Thank you.